Like to welcome everyone to the Sunday afternoon classes from the BYU Library Family History Center in Provo, Utah. Today we'll be talking about avoiding genealogical disasters. And it's kind of in a general way, because obviously if you can have a disaster that can't be avoided, uh, if it's a hurricane or a flood. But with regards to records, there are ways to avoid all of these disasters, or at least cut down the possibility that the records are lost to very, very small percentage of possibility. So we're going to go ahead and look at all the different kinds of things out there. And I thought it'd be important first to list what I call the tragic list. These are the ways in which either large or more smaller different sets of genealogical records can be lost completely. The first one is the one that's represented by all my little flames here, and that's the physical destruction of original documents. It can be accidental or deliberate, and we'll go into that from both directions. The conclusion about how that can be resolved depends on the type of destruction that's occurring. And so I'll be discussing a little bit more about that. Second one is failure to adopt and adapt to a new technology. I can give you lots of examples of this because it's something that's ongoing and is going to occur today, right now. The best example is if you have your information on a floppy disk, meaning one of the old 3.5 or 5.25 inch media for recording, you may have a very difficult time finding someone who can take that information off of that original disk. And that's just one kind of example. This one is a little more personal. It's the death of an older relative without a written or oral history. If you lived your life for any period of time, you know that some of your older relatives are going to pass on to their rewards. So what the problem is, of course, is each one of those people dies. They take with them all of their experiences and their background and everything that they have in their lives, and we lose that. So it's just a constant kind of dripping way, like the water dripping, that we continue to lose valuable genealogical information that may have been known to the people that have passed away. Failure to back up data on a computer or external storage device. If this hasn't happened to you yet, it will. It's probably almost inevitable. The issue here is to back up, and that means make sure you have more than one copy of what you're working on, so that if one copy goes bad, you have a better chance of restoring that information from another storage device. In your own life, the one tragedy is the failure to keep a journal or diary. As you get older, you begin to, let's say, compartmentalize and forget all the details of your youth and what perhaps things that happened to you during your life, except for some major things. But if you do that all along and keep a diary, then you're doing what is necessary to preserve that information, that perspective for your descendants. And you think that perhaps you're not worth reporting if you have that kind of attitude that nothing's happened in your life. I would say that's almost the automatic reason for having a journal or diary, because then you'll find out what you've done in your life. And here's one that's starting a genealogical project you never finish. That's kind of particular, meaning you choose what you're trying to do, and then you never get it done. But in effect, you may have already recorded whatever needs to be done. But some of us are possessed of, sort of overly possessive of our information, and we don't ever feel like we're finished. And then this one's a really simple one. It's called cropping or altering a photo. Okay, we'll get into it now. I thought I'd choose a kind of a major example of the intentional physical destruction of original documents. And this is what are called ancestor tablets or family records that were kept by Chinese families for generations, some of which go back over 1,000 years and are tremendously valuable genealogical documents. But during the Cultural Revolution in China, there was a concerted effort to get those to be destroyed because they wanted to change the Chinese culture. They didn't want people to be Chinese. They want them to be whatever they were thinking about. And after this Cultural Revolution went away, the people began to decide that that wasn't the greatest idea they'd ever had. And despite some of the government's efforts back then, some of the villagers and families managed to secretly take genealogy books from the ancestral halls and keep them in their homes, preserving their family histories. They buried them, they put them in the walls, they did things to keep those. The current atmosphere for those records in China is just a 180-degree turn. They are not only encouraging people to keep the records, but also requesting that they make them available so that they can be preserved. So this is what's happened in the last few years in China. Another good example is one that you perhaps have heard of. Anytime you get into genealogy, you'll find out that we have the every 10-year census in the United States, and we always get to 1890 and we say it burned. It was a lot more complicated than that. This is an article in the National Archives that it's a long article. It goes into great detail telling what happened, but essentially what happened was that there was a significant amount of the census that could have been saved, but in the sense it was stored in a very inappropriate way over many years, and many years after the fire, the documents were just simply thrown away. So it wasn't a matter that all the information was lost in the fire. It was a matter that over the time period, it was due to bureaucratic oversight, a failure of bureaucratic oversight, and the documents were lost. So that valuable collection is something that we always run into and sometimes wish we had. I guess the point here is that genealogists can be actively involved in document preservation efforts. There are sort of activist genealogists who have addressed this issue across the country and in the national government in many times. But if we're in the situation where we have a choice to help or not help, it's a good idea to get in and be made known that we want these records and we want them preserved and we want them made available to the genealogical community as historical records. So if we bring that down to the present day, what are we talking about? We're talking about, will your family throw away your genealogical records when you die or when you become disabled? I have, this has happened. I've rescued a number of collections. That's one thing that I can say, and I may mention more about that. But on the other hand, I have found that this is an ongoing problem. I was once teaching at a genealogical society meeting that they were having. This was in Florida, and I was meeting with actually right near Cape Canaveral. And in the course of the meeting, a person came in carrying some boxes, and what he said was, this is from so and so, who's been a member of their society for years, and this was his accumulated records from what he had written, and that he had found these when he went to visit his friend and found out that he had passed away, and that the people who were his heirs or whoever were in the process of throwing these records in the dumpster. And he had grabbed them and said, I'll save these and take these. And they said, okay, fine, it's garbage. So when we've got our work done, we need to, and we're getting close to any time when we think we might not survive, we need to start making preparations to see that what we've done is either already digitized and upline and kept and stored someplace where it's not going to disappear, or make other accommodations for how the records are going to be maintained. One way to do this is to digitize your records and share them on an online family tree like Family Search. Now, none of the big websites have any 100% possibility of preservation because we never know what's going to happen on a more global scale in the world. But at least putting them in the shared category online gives them the opportunity of being preserved from many different aspects. On Family Search, for example, we have what are called memories. And if the memories have the information in the form of copies of journals and documents and other things, then those memories can be downloaded in a lot of cases and even preserved on your local computers. And that would be one way to crowdsource or put out a way to maintain all these documents at the same time. Now, this is called failure to adopt and adapt to new technology. Now, why is that a problem? The simplest problem is this. Basically, as the technology changes, the storage capacities, like the one I mentioned just right at the beginning, put something on a floppy disk, is something that's on a floppy disk and making the difficulty. Now, there's many, many media out there, storage media that have had over the years that and programming that have changed dramatically changed this. And so as people simply try to preserve it through paper, then the problem is that we're back to the previous one where you're likely to have somebody throw the paper away and not keep it unless there's more effort made. But I think just from the standpoint of, let's say, getting the amount of work that you can actually do and how much effort and time that it takes to do it, is that the number of times you have to copy the information in order to preserve it is one of these factors. So if you're keeping all your records on paper, then you're going to have to spend time digitizing that information in order to preserve it. And when you are in the process of doing that, you're going to need to keep up with the current technology because it doesn't do you any good to digitize it and put your information on an old computer and then have the old computer crash. So part of the new technology idea is to maintain a connection with the technological community so that the information that you've got on your machine is available to be shared with other computers and other parts of your family or whoever would be interested. So, it's just a matter, and it's also a matter of what we call duplication of effort. If you're writing it down on a piece of paper and then you're spending time to digitize it, and then you're spending time to share that digital items online, you might want to cut out one of those. How about doing it digitally initially, and then you wouldn't have to do the copy process. So that's sort of the concept here on failure to adopt, and adapt. So one thing I see continually is that if you wanted a good example, it'd take you some time. If you're ever in the area of Salt Lake City and you want to go to the Salt Lake Family Search Library in Salt Lake, if you get there, it opens at 9 o'clock in the morning, and if you get there about 8:45, you're going to see a group of people standing there pulling rolling suitcases. And that still happens today. And what they are doing is they're hauling around all their material because they're going to do research, and so they need to have all of the records that they've already created to do as a reference and to look at. So there's some kind of feeling of security when you're pulling around your loaded suitcase. The answer today is I have all that on my phone or on my laptop computer, and all I take to the Family Search Library in Salt Lake, even if I'm there for doing research, is usually just my phone, because I can take all the pictures of all the documents that I would like to do or that are available to be copied. There may not be some that are available, not available, but I can do all my research there and walk out with my phone. I used to carry a camera, but I don't do that anymore. I do everything with my smartphone. So that's the adaptation. I don't need the rolling suitcase because everything that I have is immediately put up online, and it's available for me to review through all the different programs that are out there. So this is adopting the technology. The idea here is to do all your genealogy on a computer and or a smartphone. I would put and a smartphone. And then you can go ahead and what I call break the paper barrier. That is, get away from having stacks of paper that you have to look through. Too many times I have sat down with somebody who's asking me some questions, and they're spending all their time going through large notebooks with plastic paper protectors, trying to find the information that they need in order to ask their questions. And that doesn't have to happen. If you have it on the family tree, we can generally zero in and focus on the information much more quickly. What about the people? And then there's, let's say, do you trust the computer? The answer is I don't trust computers at all. I back up everything. I have a number of hard drives on my computer. 3 is my usual number, maybe sometimes more. And I back up all of the data that I want to save to those hard drives. And then I'm also connected to the internet and backing up to an online backup service. And I might mention that online family trees are not new technology. If you don't trust the online family trees and you're doing it on your computer, you may be thinking you're digitizing and using the technology, but the technology that you're using is still not as not as helpful in preservation as it would be. So the underlying question here is, will the information that is available be preserved? If we ask that question, that general question, is what we have in a situation, if it's a physical, climate, meteorological type of issue, or is it something else? Whatever it is, if it's something that's going to affect your community, have you done something to prevent your loss? When you think of this, think of people who are in the track of a major hurricane and fires and tornadoes and all the other things going on in our world that would have lost everything in their house. If I lost everything in my house, I would still have my computer data, hopefully. What I would put into new technology is some aspects of artificial intelligence. Those are things that are coming out that are actually new. They're not a rehashing of the same type of information before. And here's one thing that I would suggest to anyone who's in the process of doing genealogy is learn to type, learn to keyboard, learn how to enter information more efficiently. Because I tell you to put it in to the computer and you're sitting there with 1 or 2 fingers picking out the information, that's not efficient. And you're never too old. You should begin the process of learning. And if you are disabled or having difficulty, there's technology that would allow you to put the information in from an audio file, from talking to the computer. So there's ways to get this around some of these issues. So don't get left in the dust. Don't get left back pulling your suitcase into the library when what you actually you don't. And this is another issue. I don't, it must be a security thing because basically there's no way you're going to use all that information every time you go to the library. So if you do need it all, then I would suggest getting it all digitized. One thing that's important is your older relatives or your history. Take advantage of their stories. Looking at a timeline, this is a fan chart that's on Family Search, and there's other things that have been developed that show you can show whether the things, whether whose time, whose lives were occurring at the same time. So who was alive during this particular question? Like how many of your relatives lived through World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnamese War, the panic, the COVID pandemic, and things like this. That's where your history is. And if you can take advantage of your story, of the stories, then you don't have to go through the research process of finding out all the information that you could have obtained by simply sitting down and talking to someone. That works sometimes, and I have to admit that even in my own family, that there were some of my ancestors who were less than forthright in coming in answering questions about their family and about their past. They simply didn't want to talk about it. And there was really no solution to that. But on the other hand, all the other information that they had, all of their paper information and all of their records that we were able to capture when they passed away have been digitized and have been made available in large numbers on the Family Search memories, for example. Now, when we talk about oral histories, sometimes we think of a formal kind of interview situation where you have a series of questions you're going to ask them, and then they're going to give you the answers on that series of questions. I don't view oral histories from that perspective. I have found that the second I ask somebody a question about when were you born, for example, that seems like a simple question. The second you ask that question, you're asking for a specific event, an occurrence in the past. And so the person will then immediately think, oh, I'm going to have to answer all these questions. I can't answer all these questions. And you're going to get sort of not a standard answer. The way that you do an oral history is to ask what are called open questions. What can you tell me about your early childhood? What did you do when during your school years? Do you have any memories of your school years? Can you tell me, were you in the military? Do you have any memories about being in the military? Those are kind of open-ended questions. In other words, you're not asking them for a specific, you're doing. That's really the whole core of doing an oral history from the genealogical standpoint. If you're doing it for historical reasons and you're talking about a certain event that occurred, how did they react? You may need to ask specific questions. That's a different world than we live in as genealogists. We just want their life history and their life stories and what happened to them. And I have found that asking people specific questions has ended up in them being upset and me being upset and not getting a whole lot of information. But when I let somebody go, I did a series in the past, and we're still doing them from time to time, oral histories, and found that if I just started some of the people from talking, one oral history I did was 7 hours long. Wasn't all at the same time. Actually, I did about an hour at a time over 7 days. And so, this is a way to get to it. And as far as the technology is concerned, you can record to the memory of your smartphone. Now, you may not have all that much memory on your smartphone, Interestingly enough, you can now plug in a storage drive, SSD drive, to your phone and use that as additional memory. And there's technology that'll let you do that. The simplest thing that we do is we use, my wife and I use a miniature audio recorder. And you can buy these for a reasonable price. And then you just let them run while the person talks. And then you can use that as that oral history. Now, what about transcribing it? Now you have the oral, you'd like to see something in writing. There are a number of programs. I mean, there's more than dozens of programs that now are very sophisticated in transcribing from oral history into text with very, very, very high accuracy. If you really still don't need, if you need more information, the Smithsonian Institution has a lot of information about oral histories. Now, their approach from the Smithsonian approach is more for the people who are doing an oral history because of a specific historical research project. Like, for example, they're wanting to know what happened to veterans after the World War II or veterans after the Vietnam War, or they're trying to interview people who were available at some other disaster or some other thing that was changing in the world. Those are very valid, they're very helpful, but in a genealogical standpoint, additionally, we'd be interested in how their family was and who they knew and what information they could give us about their family. And as I just mentioned, you can use the apps to transcribe the oral histories, both using both free. There are free apps and there are paid apps. As a matter of fact, Microsoft Word, which many of us have on our computers, has a dictation mode. And if you just turn on your recording so that the audio is you can hear it on your computer, then Microsoft Word will transcribe the audio portion of whatever you're doing. And Google has the same transcription capability, and lots of other programs do too. So you have there's opportunities there to use the transcriptions. And when we talk about preserving our information, we're talking about backing the information up to either an external drive, at least an external drive, one. And there are programs on both the Macintosh Apple formats and the Microsoft formats or Windows that can back up automatically. They're both programs that can back up the files. When you're thinking about when you're backing up that information and your oral histories and all the things that you have on your computer, think in terms of how much of the work on your computer or other devices you want to do over again or lose. And that's when you start to think about the need for a backup. Okay, so one of the things about the information that's out there is facing us is that many of our ancestors, or possibly many of your ancestors, were illiterate. This is a common example. All these people who were signing on this particular document were Native Americans, and none of them knew how to write, and none of them knew how to read. So they, first of all, they didn't know what they were signing, except for what they were told. And secondly, the only thing they could do was to make an X on the document in order to indicate that they were agreeing to what was being said. So this was just the reality of where we are as we go back in time. So you may be in this situation, you may be in the process of reconstructing from local and national histories what was going on with your ancestors. The information here is not necessarily lost permanently, but much of the information about these individuals has already been lost as far as their own individual lives. but we may be able to find enough information about the context of where they are and what happened on this day in 1821 that would be the reason for this particular document being created. And here's another issue that when we're talking about preserving the past and preserving information. So my great-grandfather, Henry Martin Tanner, was born in 1852 in San Bernardino, Los Angeles County, California, and he died in 1935 in Gilbert, Maricopa County, Arizona. And he was one of the pioneers to what are called the Little Colorado River colonies in northern Arizona. And he left us with this one-page biography. There may be some letters and other things that he had, and I have a few letters from him that have been preserved. This is about the entire part of what his life involved. So the question is, how are we going to preserve his life? How do we do that when we're faced with this kind of a limitation? And if we don't do any more, then that's the catastrophe. The catastrophe or the loss comes when this is all that's preserved. This is all that's ever preserved and ever attributed to this person who lived a long life in a very, very, very pivotal time when the first settlers were coming into the northern part of Arizona. And so how do we know about that? How do we get that more information? Well, this is where we get into looking a little bit like historians rather than genealogists, because now we're going to be searching for historical records to reconstruct this person's life. And what kinds of records can we find? Well, in this particular case, he fortunately lived next door to a person named John Bushman, and John Bushman was a prolific writer of his diary. And they're in volumes, and they have been transcribed, and they're all available on Family Search in the book section. This is an example of when we think, oh, my great grandmother, and I never got to talk to her, and I have no idea about her life, and she didn't ever keep any documents, and she never kept any records, and how do I know about her? Well, we may find out that the information we need has been copied and done by someone else, and we kind of get around the issue of the failure of that person to have a diary and record their life. And so this is just plain old research. I just have to know. And how would you know that this person named John Bushman had anything to do with Henry Martin Tanner? Well, maybe if you look in the census records for the town where they lived, which was called Joseph City, Arizona, you might find a few dozens of people, probably a couple of few hundreds of people that lived there over the years. And you may find that it would be interesting to research all of them. And by using that, this is what we call cluster research. By using that, we can use that to reconstruct the common life of all of them, and the history of all of the people who lived in that area. Now, as far as your own personal history, in my case, I began keeping a journal many, many years ago. In fact, 60 years ago, I'm into the 60th volume of my history. But I know now there are many companies that are structuring that. And these are two, My Stories at My Heritage and the new storied website. Not a new website, by the way. It's a newly branded website. And both of these have ways of getting this information, you to share this information and give you a structured way to begin. And then at the end, the way they're going to make some money off of this is to give you an avenue to publish that in a hardbound book that would then become a book for your family. And in both cases, you can also download whatever you've written and maintain that in a digital format. So there's a way to do this that's not as complicated as trying to sit down and write a diary or your own history. This will help you get it started and get into the process. Now, it seems to me that most of the genealogical community, most of the people have started projects that they don't see any end to. Well, that's just the nature of genealogy. We're always starting things that have no end in sight. But there are specific projects. And for example, this was one type of project that I, in a sense, inherited. My great-grandmother was a professional photographer, and her father, my great-grandfather, was a was her father was also a professional photographer. She learned from him. Between the two of them, they managed to take pictures of virtually everyone in existence from around 1900 to 1940 in eastern Arizona and Apache County, Arizona, and other places in Arizona. And I knew that she had been a photographer. I knew that she had lots of photographs. I had no idea where the photographs were. And through basically making, a lot of noise out there on the internet, and mentioning that I didn't know where the photographs were, I eventually it led to the whole collection. It turned out to be about 4,500 images on glass plates, negatives, and printed photographs. So basically, then what do you do with that? Well, you digitize it. And so that's what I did. I digitized this entire collection. And then I decided that I didn't want to have the glass negatives and things in my possession where I could not adequately preserve them. So I investigated, actually was contacted by the University of Arizona to house the collection. And so that eventually, after I finished the digitizing project, I gave them the original files, which they're now preserving in their very, very large photographic collection in Tucson, Arizona. And in addition to that, I gave them a digital copy, which I also have. So my digital copy, part of that's been uploaded to Family Search. So this remains a genealogical project that I've not finished. I've not finished the last part of that, which would be for me to upload the rest of the photographs and get them off of my computer. So these are the kinds of things I'm talking about, and they're all projects, and I think probably most of us who have been doing genealogy for any period of time probably have the same things. Although those photos are now in the University of Arizona collection, I still have many unidentified images. Many, many. I don't know who these people are. I don't have not the background. I didn't have the contact with the people. So putting them online is one way of getting more people to begin to identify those also. Just think about it. How many valuable records are sitting in someone's storage shed or basement or attic? That's the question. Where are these records? And if you make it available to your family and your surroundings and your people that you're willing to help to get those records copied and preserved properly, then I think that's something that's a step towards that. And don't be surprised when someone asks you to come and look at some records. And so the solution here is to be available to inherit the collections and make sure your own are saved. And this is another collection that I received. And this is from another great-grandmother who did a lot of genealogy. Her name was Mary Ann Linton, and she married a Morgan. And this collection of documents was given to the BYU Brigham Young University Special Collections Library after I digitized it. And then the digitized copies were given to Family Search and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints Church History Library. And so between those, all of those, there are multiple copies of this whole collection out there, thousands and thousands of documents. And if you don't know what to do with an inherited collection, get help. Start asking what you're supposed to do with that collection. Now, the last issue is one that's a little bit closer to home from my standpoint. First initial thing is please don't crop photos. We see too many headshots like this in genealogy, and the headshot appears to have been possibly taken from a larger photograph. So if you look at the photograph on the right and the oval photograph on the left, you'll see that someone simply took that portion of the photo and preserved it. What happens when we do that? Well, secondly, this person's apparently his wife sitting there beside him. This is George Jarvis and Ann Pryor Jarvis, and they lived in a place called St. George, Utah, when this was taken. And the cropped image here lost all that information, lost the context of the photo, where they were sitting when the photo was taken. Probably makes it more difficult to determine when the photo was taken, whereas from this photo on the right, we can put this into pretty close, knowing their life when they died. We can guess what their ages were, and from their clothing, we can probably come in with a closer suggestion of when this photo was taken. And we have some additional props here, like the table and the lace that's on the table, and the house behind them that can basically be used to help to date and get more information from this photo, all of which is lost when it's put in the oval. Now, I guess the real issue here is don't ever destroy or change the original photo. That's the key here. So however it is, however bad it is, however you dislike it, always keep it. The one that you use to crop uh, is not really helpful. And then I would just suggest this. Don't use it ever to alter the original photo. Always make a copy of the photo if you intend to try to colorize it or try to do any editing to the photo because it has scratches or breaks or whatever. Do not ever believe that once you have spent some time with Photoshop repairing the problems and difficulties with the photo, that you've somehow created is a reality. What you've created is the same thing that's created with all artificial intelligence programs. It's part of the artificial intelligence world, man. It's no longer an accurate original. So we don't know, for example, if George Jarvis here had a kind of a rosy, pinkish colored skin. He may have been as brown or dark as any after having lived out in the sun in southern Utah for most of his life. So let's just be careful and make sure that we still have the originals, because as too many times I've found books of remembrance type books or memory books that have photos that have been cut up in pieces. Now, during the last year, more than a year now, there was a group of people who were gathered together to create guiding principles for responsible use of AI and genealogy. And here we have AI can be a tool to assist in research or provide false information. So as people begin to use AI, they start to use it in a way of putting it into the genealogical stream as if it were part of the history. And the answer to that is that simply is an attempt to change history. And so it won't work. And so we're asking here in the coalition of which I was a part that we know that AI can generate false, biased, or incorrect content. Therefore, we are under the obligation to verify the accuracy of the information with other records and acknowledge credible sources of content generated by AI. Now, as AI continues to evolve, and as it's evolved most recently, it becomes more accurate, but that still does not take from us the responsibility of using our human knowledge and our human tools to make sure that the AI retains its validity. And the thing that we're most concerned about is that an AI generated document or photo would then be used in place of an actual historical document or photo. And I don't think AI is a really big issue in genealogy yet, but it's becoming one light in a matter of weeks or months. Right now, the changes that are happening are so in last 2 weeks, virtually everything has been changed as far as the AI is concerned. And that isn't a conservative statement. That's just an acknowledgement that the last 2 weeks have been pivotal. So it's going to continue to change. It's going to continue to do different things. And it's one thing that we have to be watching as we get moving. And all along in all this, what we want to do is try to be the solution and not the problem. Let's not be the one who creates the problem of losing the data. And that some of the tragedies of when I've been called in to look at a collection, I found one collection, a whole room of documents. I had no idea how many of those were original documents that perhaps had not been digitized or anything. And basically, once I told them the value, they basically said, well, we don't have the time to do that. And as far as I know, those documents have been lost. So keep learning, keep working at learning what you have to do, can do, and would like to do in genealogy. And thanks for watching.